It is absolutely gorgeous outside, so today we're going to talk about tuning 30 years ago. Stick around. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the garage, and as you can see, the Typhoon is out of the garage. What you can't see is the Corvette's over here. It spends more time on its trickle charger than it does driving right now because it seems to want to snow every other day for some reason. 70 degrees one day, snowing the next. I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt and I'm absolutely loving it outside. There was snow on the ground yesterday. Okay, so nonetheless, we're going to actually talk about something that we've never talked about on here, and that is EPROM flashing, chip tuning, whatever you want to call it. We're going to take a look at it. We're not going to get that far into it. I'll kind of explain why. You'll probably kind of see why. There's a lot to digest, but I thought it would be kind of a cool topic to cover, to go back to look at what guys were doing before the OBD2 stuff came out, where all of the memory on these ECUs was rewritable, and what they did back in the day to do performance tuning on the early EFI system. Let's jump into the garage, let's jump over to the table, and let's take a look at what we're working with. Okay, hopefully you can see everything I've got laid out here, and in fact I've got another camera over here that's going to kind of show you things that are working with on the desktop, and you can see right now that we have an EPROM from Motes.net. Now these guys, Motes over here, is the original whenever it really comes to chip tuning and breaking all this stuff out, and oddly enough I've noticed that the EPROM seems to be discontinued on the website, which means I must have snagged one of the last ones. I'm guessing it probably had to do with getting parts in and everything that's been going on. Maybe they've been having a hard time building these things. But on top of it, we've also got the ECU out of the Typhoon, the factory one. And of course, this has got a couple extra stuff going on with it here. Let me see if I can get this pulled out here. And what you would normally have is what they call the Memcal Chip that's in there. This thing comes with a cover that's normally on it, but the cover does not fit whenever it's on the adapter, but it would go in like that. You pop it out, you have this unit, and this is the chip that we're dealing with whenever we're talking about chip tuning. This adapter is what allows us to utilize what they call the limp home circuitry on here in case this thing dies without having to pry all this stuff off. And in fact, this stuff will not come out of this adapter here for the most part. And so what we can end up doing is plugging this thing into what is called, this is a G1 adapter. They make multiple different adapters based on what year ECM and things like that that you're working on in order to get the limp home circuit in there. And then we have our programmable socket over here on the side with our chip in here that we can read, write, erase, and flash to multiple times. That's the cool thing about it. This setup is made very simple to swap things in, swap things out. But some of the other cool things that you can do with this unit, this being the APU1 here, which I'll place right in front of you, is this one has the header for burning PROM chips on it, and then it also has our USB connector. It has a connector for our ALDL cable, which is kind of like our OBD1. So this will work as a scanner unit on there. Then it has this connector over here, which allows us to plug in this ribbon cable. And whenever the ribbon cable is hooked up into this thing, instead of running a chip in this adapter, we can then just plug this cable in, and this unit itself will emulate a chip, so we can do on-the-fly tuning while this thing is running. Really crazy how powerful this thing is. And on top of it, they make adapters like this that have dual chips on it where you can do switch between tunes real quick and easy, things like that. Some really cool stuff. But whenever you get into this, there is about 1,000 different things it seems like you need. And the unit came with the cables and this ribbon cable and stuff like that. But to get to the point where we're at today, let me unplug this. Hold on. There we go. Let me unplug this because we're not going to be doing any of the live data logging emulation stuff, so we can set that aside. To get to the point where we're at today, we needed, as I said, the G1 connector, and this is the upgraded one with the quick release connector on it. And then we needed some of the Memcal adapters. And the Memcal adapters come in two different sizes based on your main chip size, which ours was this size. And it allows us to plug into the header of our Memcal and then seed it into our read-write unit on the APU there, or the EPROM, so we can read the factory tune out of it. And that's kind of what I wanted to do initially, and there was ways of doing this without buying the whole setup, but you know me, I like to buy things like this, and it surprisingly wasn't expensive. It was about, I would say I've got $400 in it total with all the different adapters and things like that. And I was able to read the tune off of this chip and then take that tune and flash it onto this chip after making a couple changes. So let's fire up the software, let's connect up our unit to our laptop, and let's go through that portion of it real quick. So now we've got our hardware hooked up, we've got the USB on here. One of the things to pay attention to is if you have a notch on your chip, that notch is going to go towards your release handle on here. Then if you have more pins in the receiver than you do on the chip, you want to put those as far away from the handle as possible. So in this case, we've got two open slots down here on the end. If you move this thing all the way over to the end, it will still pull some data in, but the data won't line up. Everything's going to be kind of wonky. On the software side of it, you can see that we're running Tuner Pro RT, which came as part of our EPROM package. If we open up Chrome over here and go to motes.net, this is where we got it from, and go underneath the GM, you see it's 85 to 95. The APU1 EPROM is discontinued right now. Once again, I'm guessing that Craig may not have these in stock to be able to make them right now. But essentially what we're getting is this Burn 2 chip programmer and the Ostrich 2.0. And the ALDU Extreme ALDL USB to ALDL. That is a mouthful. You're getting all three of those in one unit. So we have the ability to burn, erase, things like that with the chip programmer. We have the emulator and the Ostrich, and then we have the ALDL unit for data logging off of the OBD1 connector. So just keep that in mind. The other side of it is that we have to start off with an XDF file. And an XDF file essentially is what's going to be your definition for all the data that we pull off the bin, because the bin dumps into it like a binary or a hex format. None of it's going to make sense if you just look at the raw data there, and we'll take a look at it here in a second. But an XDF file breaks all that information up into things that we can understand. And the cool thing about it is, for about any platform that's supported by Tuner Pro, you can find it over on their website. So if you go over to tunerpro.net, underneath their downloads and definitions, you're going to find all of these definitions for all these different supported things. General Motors, you know, if we're doing Ducatis, you know, things like that. Then it comes down here and it's going to explain what platform it's working on. And in this case, of course, we're on a 58, which is the Cyclone Typhoon. Once you download that, you just go into your XDF and select it. So in this case, we're using the 58 SciTy, and that gives us our parameter tree. But if you notice, we open up, say, our scalars, and let's go down to like our red line. There's no data in there. It's reading as a 0. We can come all the way down to our actual tables. And let's look at our Spark Advanced table. So our base timing table, zeroed out. And I like to look at those two because they're a quick way to tell whether or not everything's working. I can see down here in the corner that our EPROM has already been detected. So the next step about it is going to be going up to our tools and our hardware utilities and going to the Motes PROM IO unit. And this is where we can choose to read in our chip. And you might have to do a little research on your chip to figure out what it is. I happen to know that this is a C128 chip, and now we should be able to go ahead and just read the chip. And we're getting an IO return failure, which means it's not finding the device. Let me try restarting it because I plugged the device in after I started Tuner Pro RT. Okay, after some trial and error, I realized that my switch down here, I don't know if you're really going to be able to see it, had gotten switched over to bypass mode. And so it essentially, that's one of the modes that you use whenever you're doing data logging only. And flipping that over, now our EPROM software or hardware has been found. We'll double check our scalars and make sure it shows up top that we have no bin selected. So all of our data should still be empty. Let's go ahead. Now let's go into our hardware utilities and our PROM IO. We're using the C128 chip, and now we're reading it. So we've read the device into the buffer, and if we actually go into edit buffer, we can see this is what the raw data looks like. It is an absolute mess. Nothing that we can do with it, but what we can do is go ahead and save the buffer to file. And since this is a stock one, we're gonna, you can see I've already got an as found, but we'll go ahead and save as found as our new bin. Then we can close this and open our bin file. So here's our new bin file we just created. And if we go underneath redline, all of a sudden, boom, we've got a 60/25 redline. Let's go down to our tables and look at our timing table to see if it's populated, see what the factory spark table was on this. And there's our factory spark table. You can see that we're maxing out at 21.09 degrees. The interesting thing is this maxes out at 3,400 RPMs. And some of you older guys that's been doing chip tuning for a while might be able to answer this for me. If I change my rows over here, does it actually change in the way that the ECU interfaces with it as we've known it on later like HP tuners and stuff like that? Because you can come in here and if I click around long enough, I'll figure out a way to change this stuff. I think I've got to go over to the table. There we go, edit parameter, XDF info. That opens up another window where I can look at my rows. Here's my rows, it goes out to 3,200. And then I could theoretically adjust these rows out to go out to past whatever the 3,400 is on this table. But I don't know that that would make a difference. Nonetheless, we have the data here. So now what I want to do is go ahead and pull up our tune on our Megasquirt. So let's get Tuner Studio fired up here. And there's a couple things that I want to check out and see how they relate. In particular, I want to look at, if we open up our Typhoon project, I want to go into our boost control settings and look at our minimum and maximum duty cycles for our solenoid. So if we jump back over to our factory one in here and we dig down through here, I know it's in here somewhere, blah, 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 not that one. Initial value of wastegate versus throttle position, we're looking at 40 to 68.75. That gives me an idea that the factory says that the wastegate operational range is probably between 40 and 70%. And so I may want to actually go in there and update this thing to say, okay, let's do our controls between 40 and 70%. And so all of our closed loop boost control that we're going to be trying to do with the Megasquirt ECU is going to kind of be sticking between those. It's never going to be able to go more than 40% closed. It's never going to go more than 70% open because it doesn't make a difference as far as where the solenoid's able to control. And that's just kind of one of these small things that I wanted to look at in here. We can go in and let's come back up here. We can look for some other things like what is our fuel, our injector, our injector sizing, and it's a lot to get into. Let me see if I can find it. And let's just do CF and let's do injector. Control F brings up our search window. There's our injector flow rate. Our injector flow rate's at 5.09 gallons per hour, which is going to be around 30 pounds per hour. So that gives us an idea of what the factory injectors were in that size. Anything that we want to do though, we could look up any kind of boost stuff, see what our boost tables might look like. But there's a lot of different things going on in the background and it's a lot to suss out. And this is why I technically don't really want to get into doing a lot of stuff on this platform because I just don't have the time. But I thought it'd be interesting to share. So let's see, what do we have? Starting boost level, let's see what that says. So starting boost level comes in as percentage at 68.75%. That doesn't really tell us anything. We don't have any kind of information on what this actually is. It just says starting boost level. We can look at if there's any conversions on it. There's not. This is just raw data. And the argument is value times 0.390625 plus 0 for the expression. Some of these older platforms had definition files that said that this parameter, as per the protocol, is scaled this way. And you can find that a lot on OBD2. Some of the standard OBD2 stuff, the SAE, has set in stone parameter conversions where it takes raw data, multiplies it, or adds it to something, etc., to get an output, and that output has to be in these units. So wastegate overboost, that's just a flag. So that's actually like number 31 would be a check that would check turn on the check engine light. If we go into wastegate overboost, it's going to set flag 31, and that's going to be something that if you were to plug in the old ALDL thing, it would flash the 31 code to let you know that you're going into wastegate overboost. And we can actually look at all the different flags, 12 being a crank sensor system check, O2 sensor 13. So let's say we're going into overboost, we would get a 31. If you delete your EGR and your EGR is still active in your code, you're going to get a code 32, etc. And so say in that case, we could come in here and say set code 32. Nope. We'll save that. It's going to put that out there in our new bin file. And we can say, let's save this bin as found, no EGR. Now comes the fun part. So we're going to go ahead and pull this unit out, and we will take our chip that we're going to be writing our tune to, and I have a few of these chips that I could play around with, but we'll just use the same one, and we're going to plug it into the EPROM flasher. We'll go back up to our hardware utilities, and the first things first, this chip is a 27SF512, so it's 512 kilobytes, whereas our old one was 128. Now there's some other stuff that you have to go into with offsetting, but luckily the software does that for us. First things first though, we need to erase this chip because it had a program on it. And then we will go ahead and check for a blank device. Hopefully it comes back, says that the chip is verified as being blank. Perfect. Now we're going to load our file, our as found no EGR, and program the chip. Literally that easy. We're done. So if we were doing the emulation side, we'd actually go into emulation and upload current bin to hardware, which would go to this unit, and it would come across this cable, and that would be the active one that's in there as we're tuning it. But for now, we can go ahead and pop this out. Come on, get out of there. We can stick it back in our adapter. Lock that into place. And we'll pop our Memcal adapter off there. Throw this unit back in for our limp home circuit. And now I can kind of fish this thing in there, seat it in, and our factory ECU is now tuned with our EGR flag disabled in the tune. Everything else left alone. Kind of cool stuff to dive into, kind of cool stuff to take a look at. Okay, so that's using the Motes Auto Prompt to look at our factory tune, and I guess technically we did make an edit to it and load it onto a chip that theoretically we could throw in the Typhoon right now, and hopefully we wouldn't get a check engine light for our EGR being disconnected as it is, but I'm not going to do that. Not really going to mess with any of that. As I said, the main thing that I wanted to do was be able to sift through a factory tune, look at specific parameters, kind of like the duty cycle on the solenoids, things that I want to make sure that line up with our standalone ECUs as we go through and do a lot of different standalone stuff on the Typhoon. And it's always kind of a good thing to have a reference point to look back at. We can look back at that reference timing table, which looks really high to me because that thing at like 14 PSI was commanding 20 degrees of timing out there at that 3400. If anybody knows about going out beyond 3400, like I said, hit up the comments, let me know. If there's, a couple specific questions that you might have about this, you might hear me talk about it in the future or reference back to it. So I wanted to give you some insight as to what I was talking about if I ever say, hey, based on the chip tune or the factory tune, things like that, you know where I got the information from. This is actually the tune that came on the ECU that came with our Typhoon. Maybe down the road we'll dive into a little bit more. Who knows? But right now we've got enough on our plates getting ready for Rocky Mountain Race Week where it is very low priority and more of just kind of a fun project. And honestly, for the money, it wasn't that bad to get into it. I just going to warn you, the barrier to entry to actually tuning with this stuff might be really high. But in a lot of these platforms, there is a lot of old data out there available to follow that's going to help you out if you want to get into doing EPROM flashing on these older platforms. It's totally viable to a point. You might have to use archive.org to go back and find the websites that have this information on it because it's so old. Most of the websites that I was using to even help me get started with this thing are over a decade old. So that's how old the data is, but luckily we've got resources like archive.org out there that will archive a lot of this information. Even if it doesn't keep everything, it keeps the plain text format that can help you sort through some of it and maybe get headed down the right track. Now, would I personally ever do chip tuning this day and age? No, there's just no way. For the $400 that I had wrapped up in this hardware, I'm already $400 closer to a Terminator X or a Holly HP or just a dirge of standalones out there, a Micro Squirt, a Mega Squirt, you know, an ECU Master. I mean, there is plenty of platforms out there, and in most cases somebody's already taken one of them and built a harness that's a plug-in harness for your vehicle to make it easy to use that unit, or you know, like our unit that we have that is literally a Mega Squirt that's built into the case for a Cyclone Typhoon, and it's plug and play, and for the most part it does a lot of what we're going to want to do, and it has the ability to go out and beyond that. So yeah, I don't know that I would ever stick to chip tuning nowadays because the money's just not there. And it's not going to be as efficient or accurate, I think, down the road to getting control that we're looking for, because we're going to start looking at sequential fuel control, coil and their plug ignition. A lot of the things that the early chip tuning stuff, this is all like TBI injection. This is still going to be things where you're going to be doing a timing advance on a distributor by using a coil and firing the coil at different times. Technically, there is a crank sensor in here, which is, as far as I know, maybe a 6X crank sensor, something really weird like that. You know, so just not going to be ideal unless you're just wanting to get away from a factory one where you can make a couple small adjustments. If you were wanting to up the boost on this thing and maybe throw 42 pound-per-hour injectors versus the 30 pound-per-hour injectors in here, yeah, you're going to be all right on a chip tune. You're going to need somebody that can do the chip tune to make sure that your map sensor is a 3-bar map sensor. You've got the correct data for 42 pound injectors, and adjust your duty cycle on the wastegate so it'll actually go out that much. That's not stuff that I really want to get into at this point in time, but I thought it'd be cool to share with you guys. But next time we come back, we're going to be talking about boost control, and this is one of the steps that I wanted to take a look at before getting into boost control on the Mega Squirt. So make sure and stick around for that. You guys know the drill. Thanks for stopping by the garage. Remember, ABT, always be tuning.